Good afternoon to you. Mark Suttoth, HurricaneTrack.com here with your Hurricane Outlook and discussion for Friday, the 27th of July, 2018. In the Atlantic Basin, nothing happening, of course. In the Eastern Pacific, we had a couple of systems out here that were trackable. This briefly became a depression, and now it is just remnants. This was, what do you call that, Gilma? I guess the G is hard. It's not Hilma. But anyway, and this is back to being a depression, at least in the best track data. So this is basically also a fizzle. So really nothing of any impact at all anywhere in this area in many weeks, despite the thought that the Eastern Pacific would be very, very busy. It hasn't been. Interesting. So looking at the Atlantic, it's also, I guess, expectedly, since most of the forecasts were calling for a rather quiet season, it is certainly not breaking precedents. Things are nice and quiet. A little bit of turning in the cloud cover here, but all of this region still plagued by a very dry air in the mid-levels, putting a cap on things. Notice, though, that there's just a little bit more convective activity or thunderstorm activity right along 10 degrees north latitude, and you got to admit that's a pretty good straight line. Not bad for a mouse, and I mean that's what I'm using. I'm not using, a pad or whatever. What do you call that? A little tablet, a drawing tablet. This is all just a mouse. So anyway, after I'm done congratulating myself for drawing a red straight line, we'll get back to the topic at hand, and that is the increase in convection, which is notable because it's been so darn dry throughout that area. And there's more activity coming off of Africa that we will monitor in the days ahead. In the meantime, frontal boundary stretched out once again across the east. Showers and thunderstorms again in the Carolinas. It is getting wet. The retention ponds around here starting to get higher and higher, not able to drain as efficiently. We are definitely sitting ducks, no pun intended, in this area if a tropical system of any magnitude were to come up and make landfall, especially if it's a slow mover. And I'm serious about that. That could be problematic. It won't take, a Category 3 hurricane or whatever to cause really, really big flooding problems across a pretty large area of the east from now going forward. And the unsettled pattern continues, although there will be the Bermuda High strengthening and edging more to the west over the next week or so. Still lots and lots of moisture being pumped in because, hey, all of the very warm water relative to average is in the western part of the Atlantic Basin, so there's a lot of precipitable water available in the atmosphere. Gulf of Mexico, nice and clear, as is the Caribbean. Looking at the Eastern Pacific, here are our two systems that failed to really do much. This one's headed towards the Central Pacific. This was Gilma. Being downgraded back to a depression on the next advisory. Pretty active intertropical convergent zone in the Eastern Pacific, and the monsoonal moisture up here in Mexico diurnally, meaning that it flares up and then dies away as the nighttime comes and goes. The daytime fades to night, etc. At night these flare up, and the day they go away. And I will be watching the monsoon moisture maybe making a return to Arizona and beyond sometime after the first week of August as we wait for the hurricane season to ramp up. I really want to be able to get out west. It's just a fascination of mine, the interaction of tropical moisture at all with the desert Southwest is really, really neat to see, but we'll talk about that later as needed. All right, leaving the tropics, there's just not much happening. I will show you what's going on with the typhoon. In fact, let's just do that now, even though the panel is over here. We do have this typhoon. What was it called again? Zhongdari, something like that. Not going to impact Tokyo. A lot of people live there, Tokyo Bay, directly. It'll be a big enough system. You know how this works. The effects extend far away from the cone of uncertainty, if you will, the error cone. But landfall of the center of this typhoon, it'll be, formidable down here south of Kyoto. And the biggest threat from this, folks, is going to be a lot of heavy rain across areas that have already had, unfortunately, scores of people killed by flooding rains earlier this summer. And this will be heading into that same general area, producing more heavy rain. So that's not a good thing at all. And as I mentioned yesterday, if you follow James Reynolds, Earth Uncut TV, I believe that's his Twitter handle, James Reynolds, he'll be covering this in the Japanese countryside as it gets mired in torrential rain and strong winds and coastal flooding. It'll be interesting to see what James comes up with over there over the next few days. So let's go back to where we were. All right, so leaving, the tropics per se, nothing really happening except our typhoon out on the Westpac. I did want to show you this because I'm very intrigued when something looks to be a certainty and then it doesn't happen. And the same thing, I make a lot of analogies to especially basketball, because that's my favorite, college basketball, and weather. And they have nothing to do with each other, but that's what an analogy or a metaphor is for, trying to explain something in a different way that people can relate to so that they understand it better. And so when somebody will get up to the free throw line, and it doesn't necessarily matter if the game is on the line, he's got to make these 2 shots and they could win the game. It doesn't matter. It's just they'll get up there and you hear the announcer say, well, this person, men's, women's basketball, it doesn't matter. They are a 92% free throw shooter. And, they've made 46 out of the past 47 shots or something like that. And so you're thinking, oh, they're probably going to make these. There's a very, very high chance, almost a certainty, and then they miss both, or they miss 1 out of 2. So for that trip to the line, they were either 50% or they were 0%, or they may make both. But it's just funny when that happens, because we thought for sure, or I didn't, because I looked at things and I wasn't convinced. You've seen my videos, I've talked about it. But there are those who were sure that an El Niño was coming. And I know that the Southern Oscillation Index is not the biggest indicator, but the folks at the Bureau of Meteorology in Australia, and the history that the farmers and people that follow the weather out there, you ought to go to this website, the Long Paddock site. Just Google Long Paddock and you'll see SOI. I mean, this is a real important thing for their agriculture and how they handle their climate down under, honestly. And so they talk about the SOI, the Southern Oscillation Index, and when it is strongly negative, usually about -7, then we're in this El Niño state, so to speak. And we got there a little bit ago. The 30-day dipped pretty substantially right about here. Is that right? Yeah, the 30-day was at minus, 7.92? And now look where it is. The 30-day is practically 0 again. So the El Niño, I think, has either stalled or it's not happening. And now the 90-day, which is a more gradual, right, because it's a longer average time, that's also coming up. But that is a remarkable rise in the SOI. And it's not a little rise like here. This is consistently positive. And these, folks out here in Australia, they take a look at this. They have a whole site from the Queensland government dedicated to it, how it affects drought and the INSO and the, how the grass and the pasture lands react. I mean, it's very, very important. So I regard this as being very accurate because, darn it, it has to be for these people. And when I see these kind of numbers, those are not El Niño numbers. Those are neutral numbers. They're not La Niña either. And so then I go over and I check the CDAS, which is subject to some scrutiny. I guess all data can be, but whatever. At least in the Niño regions, there's a lot more data out there from the buoy system and so forth. But nevertheless, what's the number? You remember, and I need to mention that El Niño is typically 0.50 Celsius and higher. Anything, that's terrible, right? See, I can draw a straight line, but I can't. I'll just speak it. 0.5 degree Celsius and higher for an extended amount of time, 2, 3, 4 months in a row, whatever. Different people have different ways of calculating it. But generally speaking, 0.5 or higher is El Niño threshold. And look, we hit that at one point right here, back at the first part of July. And then ever since, except for this little rise, it's been on a downward trend. And we had this little attempt at a recovery, and now we're back down again. What's the number today? This is coming from Levi Cowan's site, by the way, the Tropical Tidbits. It's only 0.2. So we're 0.3 degrees Celsius off of minimal threshold for El Niño. And it's almost August. All right, so I'm going to throw that at you, and then I want to show you something else. Really, really fascinating. No, this is not the latest. This is from 2017 on practically, it is the same date. How lucky is that? All right. I wanted to mess with this and kind of play a little trick on you, but who needs that? So I'm just going to be straightforward about it. This is the whole Western Hemisphere that we look at. I show you this often a year ago. So ignore this for now because, this was vastly warmer. But what I want you to look at is right here. In fact, let me just get rid of that and start over. I want you to look across the Niño region through here, roughly. Okay, look at that 1 year ago and look at it now. They're very similar, right? This is today, right? Well, yesterday. Yeah, they're a day or so off, but whatever. I mean, the Pacific, arguably last year, I see more warming all through here than the Pacific as a whole last year. Yeah, there's definitely more cool in the Pacific this year than last. Now, countering that, of course, and we cannot escape this, is the Atlantic Basin was very, very warm last year across the main development region, and you saw the results of that. This year, at least on the NOAA-NESDIS data, quite a bit cooler, but this is not, I said this before, cold. We're not, these blues don't imply 55 degrees or whatever, but there's definitely less heat content in the Atlantic Basin, no doubt about it. Plenty of heat content way up here, apparently, at least relative to average, and the Gulf is warmer. But you know what? We'll worry about the Atlantic when we get anything to develop. Now it's more of a matter of when does something develop and where does it track. I'm curious, though, as to how this is going to evolve. And are we going to start seeing some backpedaling? Oh, maybe there won't be an El Niño this year after all. Kind of like the free throw shooter who's going to make both baskets because they're 92% and they miss both, or they miss one, or whatever. Or they have a three-point shot because they were fouled in the act of shooting a three-pointer and they missed 2 out of the 3. Isn't that interesting, though? I think it is. All right. So what are the next 5 days looking like? Here's our map of the Atlantic Basin. There's Africa, east coast of the U.S. right here. Our big old Bermuda Azores high. And watch, what am I looking for when I show you this? I want to see, do we have any of these blobs that come off Africa that look like these up here? These are mid-latitude storms that are more concentrated and not spread out and whatever. It's called vorticity. So let's put this into motion and we'll see what happens. It'll run a few times. Our Azores, Bermuda high, moving around, subtropical ridge, whatever you want to call it. Finally, it starts to build west towards the end of the 5 days. Oh, and look, an interesting feature at the end of the 5 days. Let's speed this up a little bit more so we can go through it a few times. Fascinating to watch this in motion. The atmosphere is definitely fluid. Really awesome. So notice a couple of things. We start to develop the Bermuda high at the end of the 5 days more and more. And the Azores high loses its punch a little bit, so pressures should ease up out here. And what happens at the moment that happens? We get higher pressures here, or at least building west, and lowering pressure out here, presumably. And this little guy comes off Africa. Look, you can track it all the way across. There it is right there. That's really cool. Sorry, I'm just a weather nerd. Right there. See it? There it comes. And there it hits the water. And maybe it's got a chance. And what day is this? 5 days out? We'll go to the map. Last August what is that, the 1st? Really? It's that far away? I forget July has 31 days. All right, so maybe something to track down in the deep tropics. Bermuda high building in, Azores high weakening. It's 1st of August. You never know. So we shall see. All right, I'll be around over the weekend posting an update here and there. We'll keep track of that typhoon out in the West Pac. Good luck to Mr. Reynolds. Be safe out there, sir. Watch out for Godzilla. That's just a Japanese joke. Or maybe it's not. I don't know. Godzilla's on the brain because I saw the Godzilla King of the Monsters trailer on the Apple trailers yesterday. So, whatever. I'm going to shut up before I dig the hole deeper. What do they say? If you want to get out of the hole, get rid of the shovel? Something like that. Somebody said that. And I'll say it too. All right. Have a good rest of your Friday. Thank you as always for tuning in. I much appreciate your time and attention. Again, I'll be around over the weekend with more info. And then Monday, of course, is the big day of the week that we look at the anomalies and kind of set the stage for the week ahead. And we'll be that much closer to the magic month, or maybe not so much, of August. Have a good one. I'll talk to you again tomorrow.